Book recommendations. I got some good books for you to read. I got some good books that I think you should read. I've got some books, and I think you should read them. You should read these books. Hey, did I mention? I got some books I think you should read. That's pretty crazy. But today we're switching it up. Today I'm not talking exclusively about fantasy book. Oh, and I'm showing you a fantasy book right now. Now I'm talking not exclusively about fantasy books, which is my normal content. I have some other stuff in here, and it's gonna blow your socks, knock your socks off. It's not gonna blow your socks off. That's impossible. It would knock your socks off. That's the saying, right? And they're gonna change your brain chemistry. They're gonna cure your diseases, whatever they might be. They might even. I ran out of things I was gonna say. They might do some really cool stuff is the point I'm making here, because I only give banger book recommendations, and you know that banger books can change the world. Anyways, because you already saw the cover, because I'm a doofus and I forgot about camera angles, I'm gonna show you Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 in the Farseer trilogy, or book 1 of the overarching series, The Realm of the Elderlings. I read this book, I want to say 3 years ago, and I can still vividly remember how it made me feel and the experience of reading it. This is an extremely immersive experience because Robin Hobb's prose is extremely immersive and her character work is just off the charts incredible. This just sucked me straight into the world, straight into the story that was being told, and I felt like I was there with Fitz, the main character, as he was growing up and as he was experiencing all of these things, and because of that, I understood him so well as a character, and I grew to care about him extremely deeply in just this one volume, and there's an entire trilogy, and I believe another trilogy after that, and another trilogy after that. I haven't read the other 2 trilogies yet, but I did read this one, and I loved each of the books for different reasons. I actually think book 2 is my favorite in the trilogy, but you have to start here. You can't just jump straight into book 2. You definitely need to begin here, or you're not going to understand A, what's going on, or B, who these people are and why they care about the things they care about. This is a slow burn. It definitely takes its time introducing you to everything, and it does not show its full hand. I would say even the original trilogy as a whole doesn't really show the full scope of what the Realm of the Elderlings exactly is, but that slow burn aspect really helps you ease into everything that's going on and into the broader world, because you only see what Fitz sees in this book. You are only getting his perspective, and he's pretty sheltered for a lot of the time that he's growing up, so you as a reader also have this limited scope of what you understand about this world and what you understand about it, the magic, and about the overarching, broader world building that's going on. It really is one of those experiences where, because you are getting that limited first-person point of view, you are also getting a limited experience about what you actually get out of this world, but I liked that because I like slow burn, and I like when I get to build up to things getting more and more exciting and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and this series does that extremely well. I would say that even if you don't read a lot of fantasy, this is a pretty good place to start because it's not going to be too heavy on world building. It's not going to be throwing a ton of stuff at you that you don't understand right off the bat. It's going to ease you into all of that. And also, if you love great characters, you are going to get that in this series. A lot of times when I'm recommending fantasy series, I feel kind of weird, especially if it's for people who aren't reading a lot of fantasy. I feel like they're going to be put off by the enormous amount of world building and all the fake words that get thrown at them and stuff. That's not the case with this. I think that even if you're a beginner in fantasy, this is something that you could pick up and enjoy right away. So I highly recommend this, and I highly recommend The Realm of the Elderlings as a whole. Right now I'm reading the second trilogy. If you don't know, I guess I didn't explain this earlier, did I? The Realm of the Elderlings is 16 books long. You do not have to read all 16. Okay, you could read the original Farseer trilogy and be done if you really wanted to, although the ending, to me, was pretty unsatisfying because there is more story, but technically it is an ending. You could read that, and then there's a second trilogy called The Live Ship Traders, and then a third trilogy, I don't even remember what that's called, and then there's a fourth, it's called like the Rainwild Chronicles, and then there's a fifth one that's like Assassin's Fate or something. There's so much books in this series, but if you love it, that means you have endless content, baby, so Just do it. Just do it. All right, moving away from fantasy now, because I'm not a one-trick pony. You can't box me in. You can't pin me down. I'm a free eagle, baby, and I'm gonna fly wherever I want. Read some Stephen King. So, this one specifically, Misery, which I think is by far the best King starter book. I guess that's the way I would put it. This is like horror and a thriller, so even if you don't like super scary stuff, it is kind of scary, but like in a thriller way. If you don't know what the concept of this book is, it's basically this author who is pretty famous goes on a drive, and then he crashes, and the person who finds him is like a super fan, but she's also kind of crazy, and she like locks him in her house and basically forces him to keep writing books, but he's like stuck in her house and he can't get out. It's kind of creepy. And the great thing about this book is that it's both short. I believe it's like 300 something pages. How long is this? Like 335 pages. So it's not like that long. It's like a normal book length, especially if you're used to reading fantasy and then you go to something like this, it's gonna feel tiny. And I think this exemplifies a lot of the things that make King's writing so good. His ability to make things that are very mundane, oftentimes very creepy, and it's extremely tense all the way through. This is a very hard book to put down. He just constantly keeps hooking you in over and over and over, and this displays how good he is at characters, because Stephen King is extremely good at characters, and the villain in this is masterfully written. And also, if you read the book, I highly recommend the 1980-something movie, because the actress that plays the villain in this does an amazing job at bringing her to life, and really this movie as a whole does a great job at capturing the book. But that's part of what the magic of King's writing is that he writes spectacular characters and he makes you feel for these people. Not necessarily the villain, but the main character himself is also wonderfully written, and because you feel for them, these tense situations take on a whole new light and a whole new weight because you're scared for what might happen to these characters. This is just one of those books that's so suspenseful, so addictive, that it's extremely hard to put down from cover to cover. It's extremely difficult to find a point where you're like, you know, I think I could stop right now, because it's just so intense the entire way. Definitely, if you haven't read any Stephen King, this is the one to start with if you want to get into his writing. You guys are never going to guess what this next book is. You'll never guess. You'll never guess in a million years. I'll give you 10 seconds to comment down below what book you think I'm about to show you. I know that's like literally, it could be anything. But just guess. Just a random wild guess. All right, 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You got it wrong. Okay, you got it wrong. I'm putting up Don Quixote. Did anybody guess that? If you guessed that, I'll send you a virtual smooch. Mwah. That's for you, all right? I read Don Quixote, I think like 5 years ago. Good God, I feel old. Okay, no, it was like less than that. It was like 4 or 3. Was it really 4 years ago? God damn. That is depressing to say out loud. But I read this book like 4 years ago, and I loved it. I also was not a big reader at the time. I had been reading more consistently since I stopped reading when I was in like middle school, but I wasn't like as voracious of a reader as I am now, and I decided I'm gonna try some classics. And this was at a bookstore. I decided, why not? I'll go for it, and it's really intimidating. This book is how long? It's like 900 something pages long, and that scared the shit out of me. Also, I had never read a classic before, except for like The Scarlet Letter and The Great Gatsby, which are not, you know, technically on the same level as this in terms of like the prose and the density of all of it, because that's stuff you're reading in school, and it's supposed to be stuff that everybody can read. This is something that I do think everybody could read, but I can understand why people would be intimidated. But let me explain why I loved this and why it worked for me, even though I wasn't that big of a reader at the time. The humor of Don Quixote still holds up. It is still a very funny book. There are a lot of wacky situations that Don Quixote finds himself in that are extremely funny. And the thing about classics that is, I think, the biggest hurdle for most people is getting into the language, because a lot of it is outdated. But once you sink into this rhythm of kind of just rolling with what the author is throwing at you, you start to understand that the way they're using language is just different. It's not more difficult. It's not like it's this esoteric thing that's going to be impossible to read because they're using outdated language. It's just different. Oftentimes the words they're using are just different word choices than we would use, and you understand them. So once you sink into that language barrier and you understand what they're doing, they paint a beautiful portrait in this book of hilarious situations and a surprisingly in-depth psychological look at a man who has lost his mind, who is stuck in this delusion of grandeur that keeps putting him into increasingly weird scenarios. And because we're seeing a lot of this book through Don Quixote's mind, there is this surrealist aspect to it where sometimes you aren't really sure exactly what's going on, because you're like, is Don Quixote imagining all of this, or is some of this actually happening? And then you'll get like a jump outside to like how someone else is seeing the situation, and it's hysterical because it is actually just genuinely the most insane thing you're ever reading. And in its own way, it's like this massive odyssey where you're following Don Quixote on this wacky journey where sometimes this crazy stuff is actually happening and sometimes he's just imagining the weirdest shit you've ever seen in your life. But it creates this patchwork odyssey that you're jumping from situation to situation with Don Quixote, and you're seeing the people around him change and grow, and some of them are not growing and changing, they're just laughing at him the entire time. And this like fake journey that he's going on is unlike anything I've ever read before. I really don't think there's any book that's like really attempted to do this. The best way I can describe this is, imagine if you were reading The Wheel of Time, for instance, or if you're reading, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, but nothing that's happening is real. Imagine if Bilbo goes with the dwarves and the Hobbit, right? But everywhere he's going, he's just like this cackling, bumbling idiot who's running around and everyone's laughing at him, but he's imagining like this epic quest that he's on. That's Don Quixote. It's a fantastic read. It's a great time. And really, you just have to get over that initial barrier of that language. And then once you sink into it, man, it is genuinely a fantastic time. It does not feel outdated at all. A lot of these things that they're exploring and a lot of the philosophical ideas it brings up, because it is exploring a lot of things like that, they're still surprisingly relevant. And a lot of the things that people say and think, I'm like, damn, someone could have said that today and it would have been not out of place. My point is, if you haven't read any classics before, if you want to start somewhere, I do think that maybe this is not the best choice, but it is a good choice. It is a good choice. And if I could read this, then you can read it too, okay? Because I was kind of a doofus when I was reading this. I wasn't a heavy reader, and it still worked for me. It was still such a memorable reading experience, and I highly, highly, highly recommend if you're trying to read some classics. And really for anybody. I think that anybody can enjoy this. I think fantasy readers would enjoy this too, because of the way it's sort of subverting all these tropes. Alright, that's enough big brain time for now. No more classics, although this next book is definitely something that you do need a big brain to read. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This is by far one of the most complex and confusing books I've read in my entire life, and I don't mean that in the same way that when I talk about like Malazan or Sun Eater, where it's just like super dense and there's a lot of world building and a lot of confusing things happening. I mean, this is just really complicated. There's a lot of twists and turns. This is a mystery thriller sort of fantasy book. There's like a fantasy element to it that I'll explain. But the basic concept of this is that you are following a man who is living the same day over and over and over. It's a Groundhog Day situation. But every single time, he's experiencing the day through the eyes of someone new. So you are experiencing this day where Evelyn Hardcastle is going to die at the end of every single day, and it's all taking place in this like mansion area where there's a bunch of guests and people who are there, and every single time the day ends, this guy has to relive the day in someone else's body, and he gets new clues every single time, he learns new things every single time, but because there are literally 7 perspectives that you're hopping through, and they're always from somewhere new and they're always learning something different, you have to hold a lot of information in your brain at one time, because there are so many twists and turns constantly happening that it's hard to keep track of sometimes. So many details that carry over that are important, that change the trajectory and your perspective on the situations over and over and over. And I know it sounds like a lot, but it's actually extremely addictive. I believe I read this entire book in like 2 sittings because I just couldn't put it down. I was fascinated. Every single time I got a new perspective, I was like, wow, this changes everything. This encounter I saw earlier is totally recontextualized. And also, this guy, every single time he's reliving this day, the past versions of himself that exist in the bodies of those other people are still like running around. So there's like technically like 7 of this guy running around on each and every one of these days, but he has to like work together with his other selves to like put information together, but they're like not directly interacting. It's so weird and so confusing, but my God, the payoff is so good. I can't even remember, honestly, everything that happens in this book because it's just so much to keep in my noggin at one time. But when I tell you I had an extremely hard time putting this book down, I mean it. And there's like this weird like gothic element to it where there's like this grim reaper that's like telling him he has to do this stuff or he'll be stuck in purgatory forever. I don't really know how to explain everything to you. And if you're looking for something that has an amazing central mystery that is just going to keep whirlpooling around the center until the very end and have like a really bombastic payoff, this is the one. It really, really worked for me, and I loved the mysteries at the center of this. A lot of books, you know, they have a basic mystery that they're trying to solve, and they kind of go about it in a way where you can tell that there's tiers to the way they're exploring. They're getting closer and closer to the mystery, and then there's going to be something that subverts them at the end. This book is different than that because you kind of have a lot of mini versions of that happening over and over and over, where you keep building to a point, and then it changes everything, and then you build to a point, it changes everything over and over, and it's kind of exhausting, but also extremely enthralling and engaging. Highly recommend if you like mysteries, or if you haven't tried very many mysteries and you think they're a bit stale and a bit boring because you can almost predict what's going to happen. This is a book where you're not going to be able to do that because there's just so much going on. Okay, I've got one more for you. One more banger. Can anybody guess what it is? It's not another classic. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're all wrong. It's Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. This is one of the most heartbreaking books I've read in my entire life. This was utterly emotionally devastating. It left me a total wreck when I finished it. There are so many moments in this that are just completely heart-wrenching. It is just gut punch after gut punch after gut punch. My God, it's depressing. But it's amazing. It's amazing. It is beautifully written. This is a story about resilience, about compassion, about family, about loyalty, about love, about identity. I feel like I say that about a lot of books that I love, but I love those themes. The overall concept of this book is that it's following a Korean family that's living in Japan during the time that Japan was occupying Korea. They're extremely poor, they're fighting to make ends meet, and it's just about this family and over the decades how they change and how they grow and how all of these things affect their identity and the way they perceive both the world and themselves and the way it strengthens and creates tension in their relationships. It is just beautifully written. I feel like all of the eras of this book, so to speak, because you are following a family over technically generations, are all just so memorable in their own way, and the way that they're exploring generational trauma and the way that these things are handed down to children and makes them view themselves differently, and how they're trying to just love each other through all of this and failing and succeeding. It is just beautifully written. This is one of the best literary books I've ever read. Literary fiction is what I meant to say there, but you understand what I'm trying to say. This is just a very, very touching story. It's very human. It's very raw. Apparently there's an adaptation that's also extremely good. I have not watched that yet. This is one of those books where like every 100 pages, I would just put the book down and sit there and go, Jesus Christ. Oh my God, that's so dark, but also, my God, it's really just hitting me in the emotions, and it's really working for me. These characters just leapt off the page for me, and the way that they interact with each other, the way that their relationships build and change over time really spoke to me. It might not work for everyone because it is a lot of gut punches, and it really doesn't relent, and a lot of these things happen extremely abruptly, which to me reflects real life. You know, you aren't ever really ready for tragedy. Sometimes it just comes out of nowhere, and that's often what's happening in this book. Anyways, those are my banger book recommendations for today. I'm probably going to continue making videos like this because I like talking about individual books, and this gives me an excuse to just ramble about them with pretty much no other objective. Also, if you're watching this right now and you didn't see my PSA, this is a pre-recorded video. I cannot reply to any comments right now, so if you reply a comment asking me something or you want to reply out of me, I can't reply right now. This is pre-recorded. I am on a big trip right now, and I am not able to access the internet, so I can't reply to comments, which kind of sucks, but when I get back, I'll do like a mass responding to stuff. So you could still leave your comment. I'll get to it, just not right now. Anyways, folks, that's about it for today. So until next time, I hope you're happy and healthy. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.